Hello, I'm Jan Darash. Welcome to TVP World, World Talks. Now, a dispute between a president and the government is a fairly normal thing in a normal democracy. But when you're Georgia and you border Russia and the Black Sea, there may be possible undercurrents. So what lies behind the current situation, the current friction between the president and the government? Is it democracy at work, or is Russia up to its old and perhaps new tricks? I'm joined today by Victor Kipiani, the chairman of Geocase, and we'll be discussing the current crisis in Georgia. Welcome to the program, Mr. Kipiani.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Could you give us a brief outline of of what's been happening between the president and the Georgian Dream Party and the parliament? Could you just give us a brief sketch as to what is actually happening?
You made an excellent point in your introduction when you said that it's basically impeachment is a normal thing in normal circumstances. So, of course, it's about upholding the rule of law when there is a clear breach of the Constitution, and that's how the democracy works in normal conditions. But when we're saying the normal conditions, we definitely have to look at those conditions very critically on the Georgian side. To start with, this is a very novel issue and a very novel case in terms of testing the real role of the president within the constitutional model of Georgia. I have to say that the constitution has been redesigned a few times through the last decade, and this is the first case before the Constitutional Court to define the constitutional limits of the president versus the parliament, and to define the role or the limits, to put this in this way, of the president in international relations. That being said, the case presents with the myriad and with a whole range of untested issues of the constitutional law. So therefore, it definitely presents, or it has presented, with a great challenge the Constitutional Court of Georgia, and has presented afterward the Parliament of Georgia.
So this is the last or the latest in a, as you say, constitutional friction between the different institutions. The president, as I understand it, has been accused of having unauthorized EU negotiations. It seems to be a storm in a teacup, is it? But given the context, it's probably not.
Correct. The gist of the issue, the dispute, whether the president could engage herself into international interactions with or without having a prior consent of the government of Georgia. That's basically what the issue is all about. But as I said, that issue provides and entails the whole myriad of implications. The implications which are quite novel, especially taking into consideration the the recent foundations of the constitutional law of Georgia. But that is about the legalese. It's even double challenging if we take into account the timing of the issue and the timing for the constitutional courts and for the Parliament of Georgia to embark on such a novel issue, on such a challenging issues, especially on the eve when Georgia is expecting either yes or no or any other conditional decision by the EU in terms of granting the candidacy status to Georgia. So, as I said, one side of the story is about the legal implications, and another side of the story is about political implications. And those political implications, to cut the story short, is what type of message this dispute and the attempt by the ruling party to impeach the president of Georgia, which has failed, by the way, but what type of messages does this process send to the European Union? Does it speak about the candid wishes or the genuine wishes of the government and of the ruling party to be granted, for Georgia to be granted the candidate status, or is that, let's put it this way, beating around the bush? So this is probably the most challenging and the most toxic issue in all this context.
So they're trying to if I understand you correctly, are they trying to leverage political gain out of a very important decision of status, how Georgia will be received into the EU or not? Very important issue. But are they just trying to gain political points? So they're trying to, as you say, beat about the bush with sacrificing a very important issue for their own political gain?
Yes,
this is the dream party.
There are two explanations, and let's sum up those explanations on each side of an aisle. The ruling party, which is Georgian Dream, says that the impeachment process, it's not about impeaching Salome Zurabishvili, but it's also about addressing the governance crisis and sorting out the very key and fundamental constitutional law issue, where how the powers are separated or divided between the president on one side and the government of Georgia on another side, when it's about dealing with international actors, foreign governments, or international organizations. But there's another side of the story. Of the recent period of time, various trips by the president Zurabishvili has been strongly associated with pro-European trend of Georgia. And that trend has been heralded by a number of European leaders. That being said, and taking into account various statements, at the beginning of the impeachment process and throughout the impeachment process by the European leaders or by the European institutions, warning the government and the ruling party to be more cautious or to take into account the negative implications of that process has been discarded by the ruling party. And that's where this is where we're facing, that challenge. Whether the issue in itself, although it has failed, demonstrates the commitment or the dedication by Georgian Dream to carry on with European integration process, or is it just something else? So when saying something else, of course, we're hearing different interpretations. And you also mentioned in your introduction about some malign foreign forces standing behind this process, Russia, etc., etc. Of course, it's very hard to speculate. We don't have any firm evidence or any solid ground, to make one type of assertion of another type of assertion.
Yes, I suppose.
But what is obvious, that definitely, certainly, by all means, it sends a wrong message in a very untimely fashion, in an untimely manner.
Yes, I mean, one's initial suspicions about any kind of political turmoil on Russia's periphery, you jump to the conclusion, one jumps to the conclusion that Russia is involved. But as you say, there's no smoking gun. There's no hard evidence for that. So is there substance to the anti-EU fears of Georgian society, or is Georgian society, or the electorate, does it broadly approve the entry into the EU? How do you see it? Is it too swift an operation, for example?
Understood. Based on various surveys and various reputable surveys, Georgian society broadly is very much committed to carry on with Euro-Atlantic integration and with integration of Georgia into the European structures in particular. So there's been very broad and very wide and very firm grassroots support. So we saw in the past quite few cases, but strong cases of demonstrating that support. especially if we recall the attempts by the ruling party to enact the so-called foreign agency law. And that has resonated in a very strong protest in Tbilisi, and eventually that draft law has been called back. So there have been several other demonstrations where the, broadly speaking, society and various strata of society has shown its commitment and sent a clear message to the ruling party that there will be no irreversibility on that path of Georgia being pro-European. So, therefore, at the background of those messages, at the background of those crises which we have experienced in the past, the last crisis, which is about the constitutional law on the surface, but as I've said, has a much deeper political implications, of course, causes a serious concerns. Whether those messages by the Georgian society have been had enough, well enough by the ruling party, or what is the rationale behind those decisions? And this is definitely something, which is quite worrisome, especially if we take into account the volatility of Georgia's geopolitical position, the creeping annexation and ongoing occupation, the weakness of Georgian institutions, which are quite exposed and quite vulnerable to different types of malign influences, and the Russian influence in particular. Of course, that projection of the Russian soft power, if any, and of course, we could speak about the assumptions, but sometimes those assumptions are quite strong enough and quite self-explicit to some extent, unfortunately. Of course, as I've said, that causes a big question mark. What is behind the curtain?
Yes.
Is it just a simple mistake? Is it just a short-sighted approach in doing the politics, or something else? And I would rather leave, this question, if that's something else or not something else, just because of the absence of firm support or firm evidences in that respect.
Okay. As we wind up our discussion, a final question to you. Does the president have the stomach to take on the various opponents, the political opponents, in a political fight? Or is the dream, what is the Dream Party? Is it a very strong, highly organised party? How are the forces arrayed as in the conflict that you've just shown us, told us?
It's really the good question about the stomach, which the president has. Again, a few words on the constitutional posture. In the conditions of the parliamentary republic, the president has very limited powers to influence the politics in Georgia. But what she has and what she could have in her hands is a very high credibility and moral authority. That is something whereby the president could overplay or overtake various strong constitutional leverages or legal leverages which the ruling party has in their own hands. So we have to see down the road. The crisis is evolving. We have yet to see what could be the consequences of the failure by Georgian Dream to vote positively to impeach the president of Georgia. So I think that we have to witness a next stage in the Georgian political drama.
Okay. Well,
and yes. It is even more sad.
Final question.
And I'm repeating that consecutively, that it happens in a very untimely juncture of Georgian history.
Yes,
so
of course.
I very much rely that our European partners would read the situation correctly and would still distinguish the strong dedication by the Georgian society, single out that dedication from the political errors, let's put it this way, and eventually that would result in granting this status of the candidacy to Georgia by the end of this year.
Sure. We must wind up, unfortunately. A fascinating discussion. Victor Kipiani, thank you very much for coming onto the programme.
Thank you.
Great. And I'm Jan Darash. You've been watching TVP World Talks. Stay tuned for more news, headlines and comment.